The National News Desk, locally covered, nationally connected.
A flurry of Supreme Court decisions with major implications for the country. How the rulings could boost President Trump's agenda. And nuclear reaction, the new investigation into the intel leak following U.S. strikes in Iran.
That the Chinese can see that the United States is bogged down in the Middle East, and they may believe that they have open season on Taiwan or the Philippines.
Beijing's buildup raising new threats in the Taiwan Strait. The global alarm getting louder by the day. From the nation's capital, this is the National News Desk, America's News Now. I'm Dee Dee Gatton. We are so glad you're here with us. On this weekend edition, we take a look at the big headlines of the week, and we look ahead at what to expect, starting with the 4 big stories we've been following this week. The Supreme Court rules states can cut off Medicaid money to Planned Parenthood clinics. China increases their military buildup in the Pacific. And President Trump and the Fed chair continue to spar over interest rates. And Zohran Mamdani wins the Democratic nomination in the New York City mayoral race. But first, the Supreme Court increased presidential powers with a ruling limiting nationwide injunctions in a case brought to the court because of an executive action on birthright citizenship. It's a win for the Trump administration and the president, who has frequently criticized federal judges. National correspondent Matt Gelka reports from Washington.
The president took a victory lap.
It's a giant, and they should be very proud, and our country should be very proud of the Supreme Court today.
Notching a win in his battle with district courts and judges who have stepped in to block or limit his executive actions. A 6-3 ruling from the conservative majority Supreme Court limited the power district courts have to issue nationwide injunctions that affect the entire country. Instead, relief appears to now only apply to people who bring the lawsuit.
The judges have tried to seize the executive branch's power, and they cannot do that. No longer. No longer.
Justice Amy Coney Barrett wrote in the majority opinion, universal injunctions were conspicuously non-existent for most of the nation's history. She cited the 25 universal injunctions against Trump executive orders in his first 100 days this year, while noting that almost every major action taken at the end of the Biden administration was immediately frozen by a federal district court. Different Trump orders, ranging from immigration to downsizing government and firing federal employees, had all been taken to court and faced various pauses or delays.
I think nationwide injunctions are now dead after today's ruling by the Supreme Court.
The court did not address the legality of birthright citizenship. A Trump executive order looked to end it before it was blocked nationwide by a federal judge. In a dissenting opinion, Justice Sonia Sotomayor called it gamesmanship that the Trump DOJ wasn't asking the high court to rule on birthright citizenship, but instead to curb the ability for federal judges to check executive power. She wrote, "It asks this court to hold that, no matter how illegal a law or policy, courts can never simply tell the executive to stop enforcing it against anyone." There's now a 30-day waiting period before the birthright citizenship ban executive order takes effect, but it's possible a patchwork set of lawsuits can still delay it until the Supreme Court likely decides the issue next year. Reporting in Washington, I'm Matt Gelka for the National News Desk, America's News Now.
And in addition to the decision on birthright citizenship, the High Court released rulings on several other cases, including upholding the Texas law requiring age verification to watch online pornography, allowing parents to pull their children from classes using LGBTQ books, and upholding the Affordable Care Act's coverage of preventative screenings. Iranian-backed hackers have begun targeting U.S. banks, defense contractors, and oil companies after the U.S. strikes on Iran. The Department of Homeland Security issuing a public bulletin last weekend warning of increased Iranian cyber threats. So far, there have not been any major reported incidents. Federal authorities say they are on guard for additional attempts by hackers to breach U.S. networks and companies. How serious is the threat of retaliation on the U.S.? One expert says Iran's attack on the U.S. airbase in Qatar is not the end of the story.
I think we should expect that they will look to tactics like they've leveraged in the past, things like political assassinations and proxies to strike at U.S. interests when the time comes.
The head of a research lab that works to prevent radicalization and violent extremism explains Iran is likely to lean towards cyber attacks if they choose to retaliate. He adds lone wolf attacks could also be a potential response, but something like an Iranian sleeper cell is not as likely of a response. The state of Iran's nuclear program remains unknown following U.S. and Israeli strikes. Intelligence officials around the world are working to assess what is left of the highly guarded sites that were bombed. National correspondent Atra El-Nashar reports on the growing debate in Washington over the intel that's been gathered so far.
The Trump administration on a blitz to clamp down on doubt about how effective U.S. strikes were in destroying 3 Iranian nuclear facilities.
The mission, which will go down in the history books, was an overwhelming success.
The U.S. intelligence community, Israel, and the United Nations International Atomic Energy Agency are each in the early days of looking for answers to these questions. What are the conditions of the bombed facilities? How far back did they set Iran's nuclear program? And critically, was any of Iran's enriched uranium stockpile moved before the strikes? How much of it remains intact? The administration's insisting they already have the answers, especially after an early Pentagon report indicates Iran's nuclear program was only set back by a matter of months, was leaked to reporters.
So you bring the chairman here, who's not involved in politics. He doesn't do politics. That's my lane, to understand and translate and talk about those types of things. So I can use the word obliterated. He could use defeat, destroyed, assess, all of those things.
But as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff explains, the military does not do battle damage assessments.
By design, we don't grade our own homework. The intelligence community does.
On Wednesday, CIA Director John Ratcliffe said in a statement, CIA can confirm that a body of credible intelligence indicates Iran's nuclear program has been severely damaged, and several key Iranian nuclear facilities were destroyed and would have to be rebuilt over the course of years. Thursday morning, the director of the International Atomic Energy Agency told a French broadcaster, "I think annihilated is too much, but it suffered enormous damage."
Iranian officials have acknowledged the strikes badly damaged their facilities, but say they took precautions ahead of time. And in his first on-camera appearance since the U.S. strikes, on Thursday, Iran's supreme leader called President Trump's assertion that Iran would surrender its nuclear enrichment a joke. In Washington, I'm Atra El-Nashar for the National News Desk, America's News Now.
President Trump's decision to launch airstrikes against Iran is broadly unpopular with Americans. That's according to a new CNN poll. You can see the numbers right here. The poll found Americans disapprove of the strikes 56% to 44%. A majority of those polled also said they're concerned the strikes will make Iran more of a threat to the U.S. New developments, Kilmar Abrego Garcia will be tried on federal smuggling charges in Tennessee before being deported. The Department of Justice plans on sending him to a country other than El Salvador, where he was deported in March. His lawyers say he should be returned to Maryland, where his family lives. He's charged with human smuggling, which he denies. To Las Vegas, where some local businesses are now choosing to close their doors temporarily to avoid possible ICE raids. Now, major sporting events in the city are also seeing a decline in attendance. City officials say they're concerned the recent immigration blitz could hurt tourism.
What we have seen over the last several weeks is that there is a distrust that is growing within the Latino community, and particularly what that's leading to is there are individuals right now in Las Vegas that are afraid to leave their homes.
The Nevada GOP reacting to the closure, posting to X saying if you can't stay open without illegal aliens, you don't deserve to be open. President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met for 50 minutes on the sidelines of the NATO summit this week. Trump said he will consider the U.S. selling more of the Patriot defense missiles to Ukraine to defend against ramped up attacks by Russia, adding that Russian President Vladimir Putin needs to end the war.
He called the other day. He said, "Can I help you with Iran?" I said, "No, you can help me with Russia." Look, Vladimir Putin really has to end that war. People are dying at levels that people haven't seen before for a long time.
The president said that Putin is the more challenging leader to persuade to end the war and will speak with Putin soon. No date was provided for that conversation. New Jersey Congresswoman LaMonica McIver pleaded not guilty to assaulting and interfering with ICE officers outside a New Jersey detention center last month. She says she was doing her job of oversight, and the indictments are political.
This is Trump weaponizing the DOJ for people who speak out against him, for members and elected leaders who do their jobs, who hold this administration accountable.
Her trial is set for November 10th. She faces up to 8 years in prison if convicted, if sentenced concurrently on all charges. A major political upset in New York City where 33-year-old Zohran Mamdani has declared victory in the Democratic mayoral primary, beating former Governor Andrew Cuomo. He is a self-identified Democratic socialist. So what does this all mean for the city moving forward? Emma Withrow from the Fact Check team joining us now. Certainly interesting to watch.
Yeah.
This win, it marks a significant shift in New York's political landscape. First of all, just tell us more about his platform.
Yeah, so like you said, Mamdani ran as a Democratic socialist, which means he thinks key parts of the economy like housing, healthcare, and education should be run or heavily regulated by the government to serve the public good, not private profit. He's also proposed tax hikes on corporations and the wealthy to fund city programs, and also plans to open city-owned food stores, which is the first of its kind that I've heard of.
And as we look back at this election, I mean, Cuomo was endorsed by big name Democrats, Republicans as well as Democrats pushing against him.
Yeah, it's interesting to see people from his own side fighting back about this. So according to the New York Times, Mayor Adams, the incumbent who's running on the independent ticket, and major donors like hedge fund manager Daniel Loeb, they met privately this week to discuss how to stop Mamdani. Now, business leaders are worried about his Democratic Socialist platform, especially his proposals for city-run services and higher taxes on the wealthy. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out in the general.
It sure will. Emma, thank you.
Thanks.
Later on, Emma will be back to dig into the history of Democratic socialist politicians and also their success in local elections. Coming up next, your heart attack-related deaths are down. A look at the numbers and why doctors aren't celebrating the news. And
anywhere along this periphery is a danger point for the world.
is a war in Asia brewing? Why China's recent military expansion is raising concerns for Taiwan and the Philippines. In Boulder, Colorado, Mohammed Salman has been charged with 12 federal hate crime counts by the Justice Department. The 45-year-old Egyptian national is accused of throwing Molotov cocktails at demonstrators during an event supporting Israeli hostages in Gaza. At least 8 people were injured in the June 1st attack. Investigators said Salman planned the attack for a year. His attorney argues an attack motivated by someone's political views is not considered a hate crime under federal law. China continues ramping up its military exercises in the Southern Pacific, putting both Taiwan and the U.S. on alert. This week, I spoke with an expert who says Taiwan might not be the only country China is eyeing. Joining us to discuss, a Chinese Communist Party expert, Dr. Gordon Chang. And obviously, the NATO summit and the conflict in the Middle East is hanging over that right now. The NATO Secretary General expressed a concern over China's military buildup around Taiwan. How could what the U.S. does next with all of the international conflicts right now impact what China does?
I think it could impact 2 ways. One of them is that the Chinese can see that the United States is bogged down in the Middle East, and they may believe that they have open season on Taiwan or the Philippines. In the last couple days, starting June 19th, China started to pressure Taiwan in its airspace with these 74 flights going very close to Taiwan, 61 of them across the median line, in other words, into Taiwan airspace. Yeah, I think, though, that the Chinese look at what occurred and probably will be deterred. I think there's a bigger risk of war against the Philippines. Because also in the last 3 days, we saw these more than 50 maritime militia ships of China swarming Iroquois Reef of the Philippines in the South China Sea. Beijing is engaged in some very belligerent activities against the Philippines. Some of them may be even constituting acts of war. So it could be anywhere, Didi, not just Taiwan. And then again, there are provocative Chinese activities against South Korea, Japan, and the faraway Australia. So anywhere along this periphery is a danger point for the world.
I'm curious about what this would mean for the U.S. What does the Taiwan Relations Act mean for our commitment should there be a war?
Well, our commitment is to basically make sure that Taiwan has military equipment that it needs to defend itself. We have not been very good in meeting that commitment because we've been slow walking arms sales. And also, we have not been selling to Taiwan what it really needs. It really needs submarines. And of course, it needs cruise missiles. And we have been very reluctant to supply those things. We've been selling them stuff that, F-16s, which might not survive the first half hour of a war. But clearly, when we have troops on the ground in Taiwan, as we have some advisors, that sends a message to Beijing that we've got a tripwire there, just like we have a tripwire in South Korea with our troops in the Republic of Korea.
Well, speaking of key resources, oil, one of them, and one of the world's most contested waterways, the Strait of Hormuz, has become front and center with the conflict in the Middle East, but also closing the strait would hurt China. How could that closure, explain to us how that could choke the economy of one of Iran's allies, China?
Well, 50% of China's oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. So if it's closed off, China then runs out of oil eventually, probably has to draw down its strategic petroleum reserve, which it certainly doesn't want to do because it's been building it up in preparation for war. But also what it does is it rocks global oil markets, and that hurts China as well. So the psychological impact is also great.
Yeah, countries globally watching this. Dr. Gordon Chang, it's always an interesting discussion. Thank you for joining us on the National News Desk.
Thank you, Didi.
New estimates show more than 150,000 Americans traveled to another state for abortion care last year. In fact, more than 1 in 7 women who had an abortion in 2024 crossed state lines to do so. That's according to data from the Guttmacher Institute. Nearly half of those who traveled for an abortion last year came from states that have enacted total bans. Texas came in at the highest last year with more than 28,000. Health alert, heart attack deaths and heart disease have significantly decreased over the past 50 years. That is according to a new study from the Journal of the American Heart Association. Between 1970 and 2022, heart disease has dropped by 66% and deaths went down by 89%. But despite the decrease, doctors say there has been a rise in deaths related to hypertension and arrhythmia. New development, Southwest Airlines ready to make a focused effort to try to draw high-spending travelers away from competitors. The CEO listed a few ideas in an interview with CNBC at an airport industry conference. Those include airport lounges, adding more premium seating, and longer-haul international flights. This spring, Southwest announced it was ending free checked baggage, which was the airline's most recognizable perk. Coming up, flight fiasco. An American Airlines plane forced to make an emergency landing after its engine catches on fire. The terrifying incident all caught on camera. And the new way one major city is trying to hold graffiti taggers accountable for their vandalism. We'll be right back. The National News Desk team of reporters is bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We're taking the pulse of America, and we start in Las Vegas after a flight is forced to turn around minutes after takeoff.
over the sky of Las Vegas. Smoke and sparks billow from the engine of American Airlines Flight 1665, causing concern for Mark Jackson watching on the ground.
Pretty frightening. You can see that there's still flames coming out of the engine, and you can still hear the explosions.
Jackson recording a video of the airliner, seeing the moment unfold around 8:15 Wednesday morning while charging his car before heading to Utah.
It did look like it was losing altitude. In fact, you could see it was making a bank left to return back to the airport.
The plane landing safely back at Harry Reid International Airport. All 153 passengers and 6 crew members okay. The aircraft that was bound for Charlotte, North Carolina, now under inspection. American Airlines reporting it was a mechanical issue.
Graffiti taggers have left their mark on seemingly every corner of Seattle, and it's costing the city millions to try to clean up.
Graffiti is the single most common complaint in my inbox.
The city council will soon vote on whether to allow City Attorney Ann Davison to sue graffiti taggers for the cost of their damage.
And we would be focusing on the most prolific taggers that we have been able to identify, so that's not a large number. They do a lot of damage.
Aaron Goodman from the Soto Business Improvement Area says repeat tagging costs small businesses a fortune.
There is this mindset of it's somebody else's problem. And so what I like about this ordinance is like, no, we're going to show you that this is actually going to be your problem.
Burnt land everywhere you look as you enter Rowena. Neighborhoods with homes crumbled to the ground. That devastation allegedly sparked from these train tracks.
We think that the train is what caused it, and there are a number of different potential ways.
Gerald Singleton represents one of the 56 families that lost their homes in the fire. They filed a lawsuit against Union Pacific, claiming, quote, the risk of wildfire in the Columbia River Gorge area was well known to defendants prior to the start of the Rowena fire. I reached out to Union Pacific about these claims. They wouldn't go on camera, but did send me over this statement saying, quote, Union Pacific has found no evidence to date that our train caused the Rowena fire.
Coming up next, the summer holiday travel season is upon us. The TSA tips you'll need for a stress-free vacation. And a future NFL Hall of Famer possibly calling it quits. The announcement from quarterback Aaron Rodgers as he contemplates his future. Taking a look at the top trending stories on our website right now, Aaron Rodgers is almost ready to hang up his cleats. The 41-year-old has been in the NFL for 2 decades. In an interview on the Pat McAfee Show, he said this season may be his last. Also, the Chrisleys are back in the public spotlight. The couple appearing on this week's episode of My View with Lara Trump to discuss President Trump's pardon and their recent release from prison. And this dash cam footage, look at it right here. It shows the moment an electrical worker was hit by an 18-wheeler while working at an intersection. Authorities say, remarkably, the worker suffered minor scrapes and bruises. Those stories and much more available right now at thenationaldesk.com. The 4th of July holiday is just under a week away now, and the Transportation Security Administration expects airports to be packed. TSA expects over 18.5 million people to fly from Tuesday, July 1st through Monday, July 7th. The highest passenger volume is expected on Sunday, July 6th, with about 2.9 million passengers screened. And the month of May came with a 7-month low in new home sales. The Census Bureau reporting 623,000 home sales last month, a significant dip from both April's total and what economists had estimated. High prices and mortgage rates close to 7% continue to price some would-be home buyers out of the market. Still to come, a new movement taking center stage in the Big Apple. Why the world is watching the New York City mayoral race. You're watching the National News Desk, America's News Now. You can catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time, and anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We'll be right back. The National News Desk, locally covered, nationally connected. China's military buildup raising concerns for Taiwan. How experts say the conflict in the Middle East could embolden the communist nation.
What will actually happen with rates is going to depend on the path of the economy, and that's highly uncertain.
Hours before Capitol Hill testimony, President Trump tries to put the squeeze on the Fed Chair Jerome Powell.
But you cannot bring a regime change from outside.
A fragile ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Retired Israeli Brigadier General Amir Avivi joins us to discuss if peace is possible for the region. From the nation's capital, this is the National News Desk, America's News Now. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and as the world's attention focuses on Israel and Iran's fight, some are raising concerns China could take advantage of the moment to make a move for Taiwan. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins joins us from Washington.
For decades, China has eyed Taiwan, waiting and planning for the right moment to assert control and reunify the island with mainland China.
We need to be watching what's going on in Taiwan.
Some experts worry China might get the idea that now is a good time for such a move.
I believe that this is the most delicate situation in the entire world right now.
As the world's attention concentrates on the Middle East.
Please be watchful what China is doing.
NATO's Secretary General urging attention be paid to China's military expansions.
China itself also rapidly building up its armed forces to levels we have never ever seen before. So the international security situation has changed dramatically.
Earlier this month, the Chinese Navy conducting unprecedented drills in the Pacific involving 2 of their aircraft carriers. Taiwan's vice president pointing out an aggressive China is not just a Taiwan problem.
Again, raise that it's not only around Taiwan. They are all over the South China Sea. They're to the north around Japan.
Meanwhile, as China flexes its naval might in the region, the Israel-Iran war prompting the United States to move the Nimitz aircraft carrier and strike group out of Asia and to the Middle East. China although friendly with Iran, has not come to their aid, likely because it's not in China's interest for the conflict to escalate further, especially as Iran threatens to close the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's oil passes through that waterway.
China's limited. They don't want the Straits of Hormuz closed because that's where they rely on the bulk of their energy. Most of their oil comes from Iran. So what they don't want is an escalation that leads Israel to strike oil refineries.
Beijing is watching President Trump's every move regarding Israel and Iran to better understand his sometimes hard to predict foreign policy approach. Notes China will take into consideration when making decisions about Taiwan. In Washington, I'm Kaylee Gaskins reporting for the National News Desk, America's News Now. New developments. The man charged with supplying the chemicals used to bomb a California fertility clinic last month has died in federal custody. Police say Daniel Park was found unresponsive at a Los Angeles detention center. A cause of death was not released. Park was accused of shipping nearly 200 pounds of ammonium nitrate to Guy Barkas. Authorities believe Barkas bombed the Palm Springs clinic and was the only person who died in the blast. Several people were injured in the attack. This week marked 10 years since a Supreme Court ruling declared same-sex marriage a constitutional right in the U.S. Polling shows Republicans and Democrats have never been more divided on the issue. According to a May Gallup survey, 68% of U.S. adults said they support same-sex marriage, up from 60% in 2015. 88% of Democrats said they believe same-sex marriage should be recognized by law, compared to 41% of Republicans. That is the largest gap since Gallup first began tracking the measure 29 years ago. The president has repeatedly pressured the Fed to cut interest rates and wanted members of Congress to skewer Fed Chair Jerome Powell while on Capitol Hill this week. National correspondent Matt Gelka reports from Washington.
Ahead of Fed Chairman Jerome Powell's planned congressional testimony, a directive from the president to members on the committee. I hope Congress really works this very dumb, hard-headed person over, Trump wrote on Truth Social, as the president continued to rage over the Federal Reserve's decision not to lower interest rates. Trump called him too late, Jerome Powell.
For the time being, we are well positioned to wait to learn more about the likely course of the economy before considering any adjustments to our policy stance.
Powell reiterated to Congress the Fed's wait-and-see approach to cutting rates, telling members there was still too much uncertainty with how tariff policy plays out, if inflation rises because of it, and if the labor market holds strong. He faced plenty of questions about holding steady.
What is it that's keeping, in your mind, the Fed from what many of us believe is the right thing to do, which is to lower some interest rates and, by the way, match what the Bank of Canada, Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the Swiss Central Bank? Why aren't we doing what the rest of the world is doing?
The reason we're not is the forecast by all professional forecasters that I know of on the outside and the Fed do expect a meaningful increase in inflation over the course of this year.
The Fed's benchmark interest rate has remained at 4.25% to 4.5% since December. Trump has put the pressure on Powell to cut rates and make it cheaper for Americans to borrow money. The president suggested as recently as last week that maybe, just maybe, I'll have to change my mind about firing Powell.
We're going to spend $600 billion a year, $600 billion, because of one numbskull that sits here. I don't see enough reason to cut the rates now.
Trump has said Powell could cut rates now and raise them again if inflation ticked back up. Two Fed officials pitched that the central bank cut rates at their next meeting in July, while forecasters believe it's more likely for the meeting in September, after more trade policy data is available. Reporting in Washington, I'm Matt Gelka for the National News Desk, America's News Now.
For most Americans, the job hunt is taking a long time as steep tariffs, cutbacks to the federal workforce, and reductions in immigration are impacting the economy. New data from the U.S. Department of Labor shows about 236,000 people filed for initial unemployment benefits last week. During the second week of June, the number of continuing unemployment claims rose to its highest total since November 2021. Continuing coverage on the Israel and Iran fragile ceasefire. Earlier this week, I spoke with retired IDF Brigadier General Amir Avivi.
We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that? Do you have 200
A visibly and verbally frustrated President Trump swearing at both sides as a very fragile ceasefire between Israel and Iran nearly collapsed earlier this morning, hours before the truce took effect. But will this fragile agreement hold? Joining me now is retired Israeli Brigadier General Amir Avivi from Israel. General, you just heard President Trump's comment. Officials say Israel is scaling back retaliation after Trump's pressure. What have you been hearing from your contacts on the ground?
So Israel in the past 2 days felt that basically it reached the goals of war. For Israel, it was very, very important that this war won't become an attrition war. The biggest danger for Israel, the worst scenario was a reality where the big arsenal of ballistic missiles that Iran had will be used months and months, like we saw with the Houthis, and will be in continuous war with Iran. So Israel, once Israel reached its goals of war, meaning destroying the nuclear plants together with the US and degrading dramatically the capability of the ballistic missiles, including complete destruction of these industries, Israel felt that this is the time to find an exit and finish the war. And therefore, it was very, very supportive of creating a ceasefire that will really shorten the war and create the reality that we are in, a 12-day war, a big success. In 12 days, Israel brought the Iran on its knees, dominating the skies and also enabling the participation of the U.S.
I have to ask you about the nuclear program, General, because Iran is saying that they want to continue that program. Speak to us about the process of accessing what uranium is still here. And listening to your comments, it sounds like you agree with Trump's claim that the nuclear program was obliterated.
Yeah, I think that the understanding is that the program has been set back many, many years. To rebuild a program like that, it's hundreds of billions of dollars, which this regime doesn't have. Now, the challenge now is to really coordinate what will be the steps if indeed the Iranians try to move again towards building a program like that. And these steps should include harsh sanctions that won't enable them to equip militias, won't enable them to really push towards a plan like that. The regime is very, very fragile.
You made an important point about the regime change, because earlier today, Trump walking back his previous comments that he was open to a regime change, now saying that it would create chaos and he's not for it. If there is no regime change, is peace really possible?
So I think that in the long term, of course, there is a need for a regime change. And I think that Israel set the terms for a regime change. It showed how weak this regime is. It showed it also to the Iranian people. But you cannot bring a regime change from outside. The Iranian people, although they detest this regime, they don't want outside involvement.
Iran and Israel have both said that they wanted peace, but in light of your comments and hearing that, the question now is peace attainable for the region? And also, when you think about the setback with the ceasefire, how will that trust be built back? Retired Israeli Brigadier General Amir Avivi, I greatly appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you very much.
New York's Democratic mayoral nominee Zohran Mamdani is making headlines not just for beating Andrew Cuomo, but for how he plans to lead in a city as a Democratic socialist. Emma Withrow from the Fact Check team joining us now to discuss, and many associate Democratic socialism with AOC.
Yeah.
How is this different from traditional socialism?
So democratic socialism is really just the idea that key parts of the economy like housing, healthcare, and education should be run or heavily regulated by the government to serve the public good, not private profit. But unlike traditional socialism, it still supports democracy, free elections, and civil liberties.
And obviously, the majority of voters in these cities, they tend to lean to the left. But I'm curious, according to the poll that you reviewed, what is driving these voters to vote Democratic Socialist?
So I dug into into some data on this today, and I found that it's largely about economics and housing. So a lot of these candidates are focusing on issues like rent control, public housing, transit access, municipal services. Their message really tends to resonate in cities where people are struggling with affordability. So a recent poll from Data for Progress found that Democrats now hold more favorable views of democratic socialism than they do of capitalism, which is huge. So among Democrats, democratic socialism had a plus 35-point margin of support compared to just plus 3 for capitalism.
Yeah, the economic component of this election, I mean, that's a big part of what people are watching. Emma, thank you. For more on this fact-check team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code on your screen or visit thenationaldesk.com. So to come here, our team of correspondents breaks down this week in Washington, from the Supreme Court's ruling on Medicaid funds to Planned Parenthood to the ongoing battle against anti-Semitism in America.
And welcome back. Our Washington Bureau covers the nation's capital every day, and our team of correspondents reports on the important issues facing the country and how they impact you. It's been a week since the U.S. struck 3 Iranian nuclear sites, and a debate rages over how the damage has been characterized. National correspondent Atra El-Nashar, you've been covering this story all week. Tell us how the damage assessment process is playing out and what still needs to be determined.
Well, there are 3 key questions, Steve. First and foremost, what are the conditions of the 3 Iranian nuclear sites that were bombed by the United States 1 week ago today? How far back did those bombings set Iran's nuclear program? And 3, what happened to the enriched uranium stockpile that Iran had before the strikes? Were they able to move any of that enriched uranium? Did the bombs completely take it out if it was all down there, etc.? And why is that important? Because if Iran still has a significant amount of enriched uranium and the ability to use centrifuges, then according to senators, experts on this matter, it would have only set Iran's nuclear program back by a matter of months, not years. Take a listen to Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. He is the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee.
We've got to have some system to monitor whatever the level of destruction was, that Iran doesn't go rogue again. And the only way you can actually do that is by having inspectors on the ground looking.
Now, of course, politics is seeping into this. A lot of folks are jumping to conclusions about how successful or not these strikes were. The Trump administration immediately in the first speech announcing to the country that these strikes took place said that Iran's nuclear enrichment capabilities were obliterated. But the reality is it is going to take time. You've got the United States, Israel, the International Atomic Energy Agency investigating this. So it will take some time. Steve.
A lot at stake. National correspondent Atra El-Nashar, thank you. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court was busy this week as it winds down its term. National correspondent Matt Gallica, you covered one key decision from the court regarding Planned Parenthood funding. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Steve, a 6-3 ruling from the Supreme Court basically saying that states have the right to stop funding Planned Parenthood with Medicaid payments. This stemmed from South Carolina about 7 years ago, where the governor had an executive order that cut off Medicaid payments to Planned Parenthood. A patient sued, saying they wanted the right to choose their own provider, and this ruling basically took away that right. Now, obviously, this is another chapter in a very long-running abortion rights battle in this country. Even though abortion itself wasn't really talked about too much in this particular case, the ruling actually could open the door for the defunding of Planned Parenthood at the federal level, and if not at the federal level, at the state level. So Planned Parenthood says they're not going to back down going forward. They're still going to keep fighting, and obviously pro-life advocates, they're celebrating the ruling.
You should have the freedom to decide what's best for you, not the government. This is a fight that Planned Parenthood has never backed down from.
This is a great win, not just for South Carolina, but for all of us as pro-life taxpayers who have a definitive decision from the United States Supreme Court that we are not forced to fund the abortion industry with our tax dollars.
Now, I did mention that this could take place at the federal level, too, because in Congress, in the big, beautiful bill, there is a provision that does stop Medicaid payments nationwide to Planned Parenthood abortion providers, Planned Parenthood being the biggest one. That made it through the House. Unclear if it'll make it through the Senate, but it is certainly on the agenda on Capitol Hill.
Yep, something both sides will keep a very close eye on. National correspondent Matt Galka, thank you. Meanwhile, a group of Jewish community organizers were on Capitol Hill this past week, lobbying for more help with security in the wake of an increase in anti-Semitic incidents. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins, tell us more about that.
Yeah, Stephen, this was quite the group that came out to Capitol Hill. Around 400 leaders of Jewish community groups from across the country came to Washington this past week and were essentially going door to door with lawmakers, lobbying for more federal funding to cover the increased costs that they're facing for security, especially in the wake of reports of rising anti-Semitism around the country, and that those rising anti-Semitism numbers turning into real-world violence, like we saw with the 2 Israeli embassy staffers that were shot and killed just a few blocks from the Capitol in Washington, D.C., to the attack in Colorado, where the man threw Molotov cocktails into the crowd of Jewish people gathering to raise awareness for the hostages, and all the way to Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's house that was set on fire during Passover. Now, here's what one of the community leaders had to say on the Hill to Sinclair's WJLA.
The level of preparedness that we have to have every day, I think, is one that I doubt the most YMCAs or movie theaters or pools think about.
Now, we also heard from the father of Sarah Milgram. She was one of the 2 young Israeli staffers that I mentioned who were shot and killed at that Jewish event in Washington, D.C. And he said if security had been better, if it had been more extensive outside the event, then that maybe could have made a difference in his daughter and her soon-to-be fiance that were both shot and killed that night. Steve.
Kayla, Matt, Audra, top-notch reporting as always. Thanks for your help. Back to you.
Food packaging is contaminating our food and drinks with potentially toxic chemicals from plastics. That's according to a new study published in the journal NPJ Science of Food. The research shows that opening grocery store items like deli meat, cheese, or milk can contaminate your food with micro and nanoplastics. Experts say you can reduce exposure by using stainless steel and glass containers and bringing reusable bags to the grocery store. Coming up, more pigeons, more problems. How one California city is hoping to control the population. Then, the changes Jewish community leaders are asking from lawmakers in the face of rising anti-Semitism. We're back in 90 seconds. The National News Desk team of reporters is bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We're taking the pulse of America, and we start right here in Washington, D.C., where officials are now taking extra steps to protect the Jewish community.
It's unbelievable. This is the way we have to live.
Bob Milgram sharing a powerful message, speaking virtually from his Kansas home while sitting next to his wife.
Had there been more security at the event where Sarah and Angelo were tragically murdered, had there been more security outside of the event, watching the crowd.
The couple still processing the loss of their daughter Sarah last month outside the Capitol Jewish Museum. Sarah killed alongside another staffer of the Israeli embassy, Yaron Lashinsky, a man she was set to be engaged to. Others Wednesday in Washington speaking in person for the need for more government assistance for Jewish institutions around the country.
This must end, and we need your help. We need your help, the United States government. We need your help, American people, to stop this in its tracks.
It's been a challenging month. I think our community is understandably frightened.
After more than a decade of battling pigeons in downtown Fresno, California, Fresno County officials say they have finally found a solution that's humane, effective, and already delivering results. It cost them more than $200,000 to keep up with cleanup, but now they've turned to ovocontrol feeders.
Ovocontrol is recommended by EPA along with PETA.
Ovocontrol is simply birth control for pigeons.
The county installed automated feeders on the building, which dispense the bird-friendly kibbles once a day. Wolf says that while the treatment will completely eliminate pigeons, it can reduce populations by 95% over time. Still ahead, searching for a way to save the Great Barrier Reef, the underwater species scientists believe holds the key to preserving the natural wonder. And a fireball caught streaking across the sky. The mysterious object, what crews found when they responded to emergency calls. Australian scientists are searching for supercorals to help save the Great Barrier Reef. A series of devastating mass bleaching events have turned large patches of vibrant colors a bright white. The culprit, record high marine temps. Researchers have found nearly 40 coral species that are more resilient to heat, acidity, and low oxygen levels. So far, more than 125,000 corals have been planted. And a mysterious fireball was seen in the sky across several southern states Thursday. This video was captured in Columbia, South Carolina by our station WACH. According to the National Weather Service, a satellite-based lightning detector picked up a possible lightning streak in clear skies over Gasburg, Virginia. Several firefighters responded to the area where it was spotted. No smoke, fire, or debris was found. The American Meteor Society said it received over 140 reports of fireball sightings across 6 states. And that'll be all for us on the weekend edition of the National News Desk, America's News Now. Don't forget, you can catch us live from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Just check your local listings. You can also watch us online and catch up with the latest headlines on thenationaldesk.com. Thanks for watching the weekend edition of the National News Desk. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and from all of us here, have a great week.